Alright, so a while back when I reviewed Season 7 and ranked all of its episodes, I received this comment from fellow YouTuber ToonrificTariq. So Scenes from the Class Struggle in Springfield is Tariq's all-time favorite episode. Huh. Now I feel sheepish about ranking it only at number 15 for the season. But you know, I absolutely love takes like these, where someone's favorite is one I hadn't seriously considered before. It instinctively invites reflection, makes me want to take another look at it. Is there something I'm missing here? Are my own biases and personal tastes getting in the way? Is it because I don't care one iota about country clubs and fashion? Basically, this concept incepted an idea into my brain, and I can't get it out until I review it proper. So let's see if we can figure it out. What makes Scenes from the Class Struggle in Springfield such a special episode? First of all, I think what really stands out about this one is Marges' motivations. That it's a story about Marge's social life, her desire to simply have friends. We see this concept regularly for Lisa, and occasionally Bart and Homer, but for Marge, this is extraordinarily rare. Marge's stories tend to be about familial relationships, or her getting a job or going on a social crusade. The closest comparison so far would be Marge on the Lam, when she befriends Ruth Powers. However, I think this specific story fits in better with Marge's established themes and takes more advantage of her strengths as a character. Marge is very well suited to these observational and awkward situations. She is the queen of mom jokes, after all. We love to laugh and shake our heads at how cute and naive she is. Putting Marge in this room with a bunch of privileged and out-of-touch socialites is gonna bring the laughs. It's fun to see Marge try to find common ground with these ladies. A character like Homer in this setting will inevitably turn into a snobs versus slobs story. Whereas with Marge, we get a more nuanced and thoughtful look at the class divide. We want to see if she can infiltrate this group. Especially since, in my opinion, Marge is the most rootable character on the show. The Simpsons loves to make Marge the butt of the joke, make it a point about how little she gets out of the house. So we instinctively want Marge to succeed, root for her to have a good time. The episode does an excellent job of letting us have it both ways, where they give us enough fodder to make fun of these pretentious socialites and explicitly shows how awful rich people can be, but they're written just pleasantly enough where we're not repulsed by Marge trying to fit in. This moment is the exception rather than the rule. Can you imagine a version of this episode where every one of them is like Susie, where they're constantly making passive-aggressive digs at Marge? A story like Mean Girls really only works when you're trapped in a high school or a prison. Speaking of Susie, I love her presence in the story, adding that little bit of conflict to keep the story on edge. The writers described her as the Dorothy Parker, the character deftly employing her cutting wit while casually sipping from a highball. There is so much shade here, it's delicious. I can't tell if Susie hit the scene 50 years too late or 20 years too early. Judging by her outfit, I would say 50 years too late. But I think what's great about Susie is how she brings attention to the stakes of the story. That to these rich socialites, this is all just a game. Sit around, make witty jabs at each other, go back to their mansions. We've seen in several scenes that the country club folks love playing games. It's all simple amusement to them. But for Marge, these games are like life or death situations. Should she be a classy winner or a graceful loser? How should she continue altering her dress to fit in? I think we've all been in these situations socially, have taken those little jabs from people. There have been other Simpson stories where characters get teased, feel insecure, but this one feels uniquely realistic. I mean, I love Summer 4'2", and I think these super chill kids are what this Lisa plot needs, but let's face it, they are on the idealistic side of things. Although I guess the same could be said for this ending. But in this case, they're deliberately making a subversive point here. In the real world, we wouldn't expect the country club folk to welcome the Simpson family. The best Marge was probably going to do, in the long run, was being their token poor friend. Their pet that amuses them with stories of their middle-class lifestyle. Although who knows, maybe Evelyn would have continued helping Marge out. I really like how they give us that bit of backstory between Evelyn and Marge. It establishes how both started in dramatically different situations, and one generation later, nothing has changed. But also learning a little more about how Marge was in high school, not specifically focusing on her relationship with Homer. It grounds the story a bit, links this fish out of water stuff closer to Marge's established character and the Simpson family. I mentioned the Marge on the Lamb connection earlier with the focus on Marge's friendships, but the episode this really reminds me of is There's No Disgrace Like Home. In many respects, this feels like the direct sequel to that one. The Simpsons with another brush with high society, this emphasis on feeling judged and fitting in. This time with Marge driving the bus instead of Homer. Also, coincidentally enough, there are both episodes about The Simpsons TV. The Simpsons got a new TV at the end of that episode, and Grandpa destroys it at the beginning of this one. R.I.P. TV number 2, you had a good run. All of the Ogdenville stuff works well as an opening set piece, both as a vehicle for observational jokes and establishing The Simpsons' humble roots. For the longest time, I couldn't see a Sony product without thinking Sorny. Curse you, Simpsons. Anyway, this transitions very organically to the Marge stuff, giving us a starting point for her journey, where they establish how she never treats herself to anything nice, how selfless she is for her family. Also, that it establishes Lisa as a major player in the Marge storyline. These later scenes are so much more effective because Lisa was there from the start. She was the one who found the Chanel suit. In my opinion, this Marge-Lisa relationship is the best part of the episode. I absolutely love how they're written here. Mostly because it's not our typical Marge-Lisa storyline. We're so used to them totally being on the same page, typically with Marge supporting Lisa narratives. How many other episodes can you think of where these two have a significant argument? It's like this, Lisa the Skeptic, and that time they feuded over going into space. But this example is great because it reverses the usual dynamic. That Lisa starts out in this supporting place to Marge, is giving her that little push, and then afterwards, Marge becomes more and more frustrated with Lisa. Like this scene right here speaks to my soul. I remember vividly being that excited kid, jumping up and down, breathlessly describing whatever new thing I discovered at school. And in other moments, I remember my parents just straight up yelling at me at various times in my childhood. Now I should be clear that my parents were amazing and wonderful and supportive as a whole, but these situations happen, that parents inevitably get pushed to their limits. People snap. This moment is so raw, there's so much emotion packed into it. We've never even seen Marge blow up at Bart like this before, let alone Lisa. Lisa is the perfect character to demonstrate how far Marge has strayed from her usual attitude. Following up with Marge destroying her dress is perfect storytelling, the perfect capper to this tense situation. Honestly, this entire scene is super underrated and needs to be talked about more in the all-time great Simpsons moments. Unfortunately, I do think the episode struggles a bit in explaining Marge's character journey from her point of view. This isn't a story like the Springfield connection, where in Act 1 they make such a point about how bored Marge feels. Her character shift makes total sense in that episode, whereas this opens with the TV and the Ogdenville stuff to establish the family's situation. There isn't an initial expression of something missing in Marge's life, she is simply won over by Lisa's argument. It's portrayed as Marge is impressed by this really nice country club and immediately views rich people as being better than them. It's a little too quick for me. I think if we had an actual flashback showing Marge being ignored in high school, the character shift would play better. This isn't a huge problem, like you can still follow the logic of Marge's situation. I just think this ending would be more impactful if they explored Marge's needs more openly. In the DVD commentary, they talked about how Homer's line right here was 80 yards in later, to make things clear. Think about how this scene plays without it, Marge silently realizing and turning around. Maybe this is just a staging problem, but I think the fact that they needed to add this line suggests that Marge's character arc was a little flimsy in execution. The jokes in the episode are pretty solid as a whole. I don't think it's among the funniest of Season 7 or anything, but all the country club satire and the observational humor gives it a different flavor than most. And if you're tired of all the incisive observations humorously phrased and delivered with impeccable timing, Homer's B-plot provides some broad, wacky humor. This B-plot kind of feels like cheating in a way. Just pair up Homer and Burns and collect your free laughs. We get stuff like Homer Nixon, the open-faced club sandwich, Homer chewing on a golf ball, and Mr. Burns' cake. Also, interesting that Mr. Burns golfs right-handed, despite canonically being a lefty. Must be one of those right-handed batters, too. This B-plot is a bit disposable, I guess, but at least it links up to our main storyline. Really, after this point, Marge doesn't even need Evelyn's sponsorship. Homer probably has Mr. Burns on the hook for a lifetime membership. Essentially, the moral of the episode is that blackmail is the real key to upward social mobility. This is the part of the review where I'm supposed to give my overall thoughts, like I had written and edited a whole paragraph about it already. But honestly, I don't feel fully satisfied with any conclusion I can make about this episode. I feel I've described what really works about it, and why I think the Simpsons community sleeps on it too much, including myself. The real reason I revisited this episode was because of that original comment. I wanted to figure out why it was his favorite. I know ToonrificTariq from his amazing work on YouTube. There has to be a good reason. So I asked him if he would share his perspective. I figure since it's his favorite episode, it's only appropriate that he gets the last word. So take it away, Tariq.
Thank you, The Real Gems, for the great introduction. Of course, this is pre-recorded, so for all I know, you could have called me the mascot of an evil corporation, which I am. Today's video is brought to you by Skillshare. I've been pretty vocal and adamant over the years as to how I feel about the Simpsons series as a whole, but especially season 7. I feel like it's the best season of television that I've ever sat through, with literally no misses. So as a kid, I think my favorite episode was the day the violence died, but as an adult, it's definitely scenes from the class struggle in Springfield. When Jims asked me to articulate why exactly this is my favorite, I froze. Not because I don't have a reason, but I almost feel like it's a little too difficult to put into words. So without further ado, here's my attempt. I think the reason I love this episode so much has little to do with the episode itself, but more to do with what it does for Marge as a character. Marge is my favorite character from the whole series. Not an answer that you hear too often, but one that I stand by wholeheartedly. Everything she's ever said has either been hilarious, selfless, or extremely sincere. They play with her temptation and loyalness to Homer in the later seasons, but that's not we're not talking about that. I think Marge is a way more interesting character than Simpson fans and, to even an extension, the writers give her credit for. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say that besides Lisa, Marge is the only member of the family to function like a normal human being in her everyday choices and dialogue. One thing about Marge, though, is that she's not separated from the family as often as everyone else. Homer has work or the bar, Bart and Lisa can go to school, even Maggie has 2 theatrical shorts. But the writers typically have to invent something for Marge, right? Like a new neighbor, a gun, or make her a cop in order to give her something to do, since her existence is so bound to this family. Even in an episode like Trilogy of Error, where all of the characters are off doing different things, Marge steps in and interconnects them all. Scenes from the class struggle in Springfield is a Marge story that separates Marge from the family, and instead of showcasing how her not being around affects them, like in something like Springfield or How I Learned to Stop Worrying in Life, it's the first time the family steps aside of themselves and makes sacrifices for her. We constantly see through flashback that Marge gave up so much to raise her family, and she never looked back or complained. Even when getting the original suit, Marge is hesitant about buying something that's just solely for herself. Now, if it was a suit that they could all wear, I think Marge represents, for a lot of us, the caring, loving woman that we all have in our lives. For me, she reminds me of my grandmother, but I'm pretty sure a grand majority of people have someone that they can think back to with the heart and sincerity of an earnest character like Marge. And I think the thing that continuously draws me back to this episode is because for the first time to me, this character that I always saw as the picture-perfect mother character was shown to have the same wants, needs, and desires as everyone else. She was humanized. She wanted to fit in, just like Bart does, just like Lisa does. And even though the writers gave her that and took it away at the end of the episode, it does paint a pretty good picture for us to why Marge is so content with just being around her family. Because of Homer's in-your-face humanity, because of how Lisa is not afraid to speak her mind, because of Bart, but mainly it's because the love is unconditional. She doesn't have to worry about a new suit, witty conversations, memberships, joke names that I didn't catch until watching this with subtitles on Disney+. All Marge ever has to worry about when it comes to her family is love. Thanks, Gems.